What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. This is our mostly monthly Instagram Q&A. I would love to say monthly, but we haven't been able to hold up to that. But we do have a really good stream of questions that came in from Bryan's Instagram followers, which we're going to dive into. But before we jump into those, as always, Bryan, can you kick us off with a few updates, please?
Yeah, I'm going to be quick because we have 16 really solid questions, mostly solid questions to get to. So first update for me was I had 6 drinks this Saturday evening, and it's probably the most drinks that I've had in a sitting in a really long time. It was fun. I had a great time. It was between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. I got to work, got home, the plan was to get a decent night of sleep and see how minimally I could have 6 drinks affect me. And unfortunately, my daughter woke up at 5:30 a.m. and I couldn't fall back asleep. She fell back asleep with Kim until 9. So Kim got a full night of sleep and I slept 5.5 hours. So I actually think that my struggles are more related to the sleep than the alcohol because I didn't really feel hungover. But one of the interesting things that I've discovered recently since getting into all this cardio stuff and listening to a number of experts discuss glucose sensitivity and things like that. And it seems the old common knowledge that I held for many years, forever basically, was that, hey, if you get a shitty night of sleep or you feel under recovered, then you take a day off and you give yourself grace and you come back and you have a good session the next day. And this is how I've always operated. Since the last year and learning about all this cardio stuff, it seems that the one thing that can actually restore your glucose tolerance and just general sense of well-being in the way that your body is functioning is to actually work out when you're underslept or not feeling great. It seems to have a regulatory effect on your glucose response and stuff like that. And so I obviously felt like discombobulated and pretty awful all day. And then we got back from an event that we were doing and I got on the Peloton and did a bike ride. And aside from the fact that my performance was low and my heart rate was high, which I fully expected, given that my resting heart rate was up about 10 beats a minute, I expected my working heart rates to also be higher. But I did it. I biked for an hour. I was about 10 watts lower than what I would usually be for zone 2. And my heart rate was about 10 beats higher than I would usually be. But aside from that, I got off, felt great, and felt like things were mostly restored to normal and it reset everything. And I ended up sleeping 8.5 hours the next night and everything was all good from there. I had a fantastic cardio session the next day, set PRs for distance and track and everything. One day off and everything's back to normal now, heart rate and circadian rhythm and all that stuff. That's cool. And an interesting lesson just in the way that I just thought it was interesting that I always defaulted to taking time off when I'm underslept and just giving myself a day off. But it really does just make you feel worse. Like you almost feel like you get into this cycle where like you want to eat shitty food and then you're not feeling good. So you want more shitty food. And like by just working out and doing a bike ride, it almost reset me and made me feel like back to normal. I lost my cravings and stuff like that. I thought that was interesting.
There is a very interesting, like what you just said, I wish I had some more data on it, but it's purely a self-perception thing I've noticed, and as well as working with clients. Like when you train, you feel great. Like you're motivated to eat your healthy foods and those sorts of things. But if you have a rest, sometimes in rest days or when you don't, it's rather ironic because the days I'm using air quotes here, can get away with some of the shittier foods or like post-workout when your partitioning is so much greater and stuff from the hormonal responses. But it's like you have an aversion to that because you just did something like good or healthy. But then on the days that you're not training and stuff, you're like, yeah, give me the bullshit food. But it's like a double whammy, but not going to partition it well on your rest days.
Yeah. No, that's totally right. And I would even justify it and be like, I need these extra carbs because I'm not feeling well. They're going to help me recover. And then I'll use them tomorrow for my workout or whatever. And so you can go down this like whole rabbit hole of justification. Next update, I alluded to it on the last podcast that I was going to go hang out with Milo and Cass at N1. And so I did that. It was rad. I biked up there and I only got to hang out for about an hour. I had some stuff I had to do. I had to turn around and come home, but got to chat with them a little bit, got to watch Milo do a little bit of the one arm lengthened overloaded pull down from the Prime machine, which we all love. It's just an amazing piece of development equipment there. And then Milo did some lengthened partials after failure, which just makes me happy because I touched on that last episode and our kind of differences in the way we view partials. And Cass was making him do some post failure partials. And the word on the street is that there might be a collab coming between Milo and Cass about how to optimize the use of lengthened overload, lengthened partials, long muscle lengths, all that stuff. And I'm very curious. I'm paying attention to it because Cass is more on the side of using partials after failure, kind of the way I do it. And Milo's obviously on the other side. I told those guys I'm really curious to see what they come up with in regards to that piece. Last update is that I bought Kim her bike. I talked about that last week, but we went for our first bike ride. And just a real funny, quick story. I was like, look, babe, I think I was being condescending. I was like, look, babe, when I get into zone 2, I'm at like 180 watts. So look, when I bike with you, I'm just going to understand it's not going to be zone 2. It's just going to be zone 1. It's all good. Don't worry about it. And she's like, you are being so condescending. I'm in shape. I Peloton. Like I can blah, blah, blah. And I was like, babe, 180. I just don't know. I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you, all this stuff. She weighs less. So obviously it takes less to power that engine, or less effort rather. But on our ride, the first 15 minutes or so was like this gradual incline. Maybe it was like 2 to 4 degree incline. You almost couldn't see it so much, but you could feel it. And she was on my ass the whole time. I was like, man, I'm in the higher end of zone 2. And I'm chilling. So I had to eat my words a little bit. But then once we got to the turnaround point, 15 minutes in, all that 2 to 4% grade that we went up, we had to go down. And I am able to go fast enough and keep my RPM rate high enough on that descent that I can still keep my heart rate up at 135, 140, 145 as I'm going down this grade. Kim, either she wasn't capable of producing that much power down the grade, or I think more she was just hesitant and timid of the speed that would be necessary on these trails that are relatively novel to her. So I was right in the sense that we biked for an hour and I ended up spending 45 minutes of that hour in zone 1 and 15 minutes of it in zone 2. But it was impressive that she was on my ass keeping up with me on the inclines. And so I think what we're going to try and do together is find an incline that just goes. And so it's not like a series of ups and downs where I'll drop out of zones, but more just like a consistent incline grade that maybe we can hit for 30, 45 minutes, something like that. And I think that would even the playing field a little bit. But she was super amped with her bike, with her first ride, and just that freedom that you've just talked about, just getting out in nature and being like a kid again.
Yeah. I want to say you told us that story.
Oh, did I?
Damn it. Did I think so?
How could that?
There was something about a bike ride and you talked about eating your words, but I couldn't
Maybe
make
I
that
did.
up. But only time will tell.
Damn, that would be pretty bad, but that's certainly possible. I've told that story like 3 or 4 times, and I really couldn't remember if I had told it on the podcast because we biked. Oh, it wasn't this past Friday that we biked. I think it was the Friday before. Well, you guys heard the story twice. It is what it is. Let's move on to Aaron's updates.
So the first one, I guess, it's not so much of an update, but I've had essentially 2 weeks of solitude. Jenny dropped me off at the airport like Wednesday morning. So tomorrow will be like 2 weeks. And then obviously I had my like Hong Kong trip and stuff. And I've really only had 3 conversations since. And I've just, especially since being back, because I was like feeling unease around just like how much variation was in my schedule and stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm back home in Bali. I'm doing like nothing this week, but just eating, training, like working and sleeping. And I really haven't done anything. I've really enjoyed the week. I got a whole shit ton of stuff done. I feel ahead on some things like planning stuff. And I'm just like, excuse me, I just really liked it. And then I had the thought, was like, I wonder how long, because like to me, I look at solitude as like a positive thing. I know it can be depending on the definition framed in positive or a negative light. But I was like, I wonder how long it would take for that like solitude to turn into loneliness. And I'm a little bit afraid of where that threshold might be for myself.
Because you're still enjoying it?
I'm still enjoying it, yeah. And I just, it's just me. And there's no kind of weird conversation you get into that you don't want to have. Like my conversations have all been like very focused. Obviously I have like my client check-ins and stuff like that, but then it's just like knocking shit off the to-do list. My food gets delivered. I'll go to the grocery store for my breakfast stuff, but I'm just like, yeah, it's a groove. And all I'm saying is it's exactly what I needed post a month of things all over the place in the US.
That's awesome.
So I've enjoyed my week. 2 weeks, I should say.
I can relate. I'll be quick, but when Kim used to go away for travel and stuff, I may have told this story before, but she would go to Asia for 10 days and stuff 10 years ago when she was working corporate job. And the first 4 to 6 days, I'd be like, oh, this is heaven. I can do whatever I want. I never have to check in. I just watch movies and go to work and whatever. And then by day like 4 or 6, I'd be falling apart. And I'd be like, man, when's she going to come home? It seems like you've gotten well past that boundary.
Yeah. I do enjoy it. But it was just like interesting to see. And then with my week of solitude, when I got back on Monday, I was like, I am going to have a hell Monday so that I can be everything fully on plan by Tuesday. Have my groceries, my meal plan, like everything done, ready for Tuesday, so I can just be like, I'm back in a groove thing. My body fought me all last week with training and food. Like my body weight was super fluctuating, dipping low. And I recorded, even though everything was to a T on protocol for the entire week, the lowest average body weight since the first week of April. So essentially 2 months ago, which was really wild. And it pissed me off, because I was like, and not so much that it was just the body weight, but I also had the corresponding evidence in training sessions, like really like subpar pumps, not great training sessions. Like you can just feel when you're like, I feel like I'm just not like carbohydrate compensated, and glycogen compensated is probably a better term to use. And you can just feel it. And then you look like shit too in the mirror and stuff. And then you're like, coupled with the fact that I'm already at 15% body fat, like it's not going to look that good as is. So I was just pissed off about it. And then when I had my check-in this week, I was like, obviously body weight's down. What are we doing? And what I really like is Jackson's, we're going to take a sledgehammer approach. I don't want to take like another 7 to 10 days to get body weight back to baseline and stuff. And he's like, we're just going to do sushi refeeds every single night until morale improves.
Cool.
Sort of thing. So I had 3 of them. And then today, the carbs like stuck and I'm like back. Actually, it was the heaviest I was ever this time. It was like a 213.1.
Nice.
But like it wasn't bloated or anything in the morning, like felt normal, but body weight was like there. And then I had an amazing training session today. So that was like, I did the approach, except for the last 3 nights, like eating dinner's been, it was a little bit of a push to get all the food in. I was not really enjoying it.
Yeah, that'll happen at 213. I feel like somehow that doesn't really surprise me because you had those crazy days with 32,000 steps, like 3 days back to back. And so I feel like what was happening with your body weight was that there was like this delayed effect where all of that walking you did took a few days to catch up and show on your physique or whatever. And so that's probably why you felt shitty, lost weight and all that stuff a few days later.
Yeah, with increased flexibility or added variation of things, there's going to be some like low grade inflammation, especially with traveling and flying and time zones and the subsequent sleep. Like you're going to be a little bit inflamed and carrying some inflammation weight from that. And then when all that kind of dumps, you get like a more of a 1-to-1 representation. And that's essentially what happened last week.
Yep.
Where my low was even like, I had like almost a 207 flat. And that was like weeks ago was those numbers.
Yeah.
And that was at like day 3 or 4 after being back and feeding normally and everything.
Yep. Definitely makes sense. All right. Should we jump into questions?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. These first 2 are very specific to me. So I'm just going to address them really quickly and then we'll move on to some more bulky stuff here. The first one is, how do I feel about not doing a spring cut this year? And so for those that don't know, I decided not to do this basically because I wanted to make sure I was fueling all of my cardio that I'm doing. And I feel great about it. Thank you for asking. I'm actually really happy not to be cutting right now, not to have the pressure of those daily Instagram updates. As much as I enjoy the back and forth communication with the people that follow my journey. And I'm very honored by the sentiments that people express about how much it's been helpful for them to follow that journey and stuff like that. I've been doing it now 3 or 4 years in a row where every spring or early summer I would cut, and it feels very free now. I feel like I can really go out and enjoy the spring and the summer here in Boulder, which are some of the most beautiful times to be outside. So I was able to, like I said, go out and have 6 beers with my friends the other night. And that's something I obviously wouldn't have done if I was in the middle of my cut right now. It's been cool. I'm fueling my cardio. The cardio is improving and body weight is basically stable. I feel really solid about it. The next question is, we need an update on only eating weed now, 5 months in. And for those that missed this, back in January for my New Year's resolution, I decided to stop smoking weed and only eat it. This was going to be to see if it helps my VO2 max / cardiovascular performance, as well as just the health side associated with not smoking and damaging your lungs. In complete transparency, when I was going through all of those headaches back in, I guess it was mostly April, I stopped eating weed because I thought that the eating of the weed may have something to do with what was causing the headaches. I don't actually know if it was or was not the eating of the weed that was doing that, because I have been only smoking it for the last month or so since that time. And as of yesterday, this is a fortuitous timing for this question, but as of yesterday, I decided to stop smoking again and go back to eating it. So I very much am committed to this. I just took this hiatus because I didn't know what was causing it, and I was basically willing to do anything at that point. What I should have done, obviously, was just stop doing weed entirely. That would have been the prudent move to make, but stopped eating it, started smoking it again. There's definitely some pieces of smoking it that I like more, specifically like the fact that it lasts a quarter of the amount of time and you don't have to wait 40 minutes for it to kick in. You just are like, hey, I want to be high right now, and you do it, and then 30 minutes later you're basically normal again. So there's certainly like positives and negatives there, but yeah, that's the update. Yeah, any thoughts on either of those, or do you want to move on to question 3?
I only had a very small one on the cardio one, or not doing the spring cut per se. I think it's you're doing so much cardio, not like an absurd amount, but like relative to last year or whatever, that I feel like with the added flexibility of your life, like you just have more energy expenditure as well. So it's like a good like middle ground of it, and because of all just the additional like caloric need of the activity that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I actually realize I have to consciously focus on putting calories in my body a lot of times, and they're not always like the cleanest, because I went through a period for 5 days last week where I was like, I'm going to eat really clean. Like, I'm going to stop eating crap and I'm just going to focus on like really high quality natural foods, like stuff you can get on the outside of the aisle of the grocery store. And literally my body weight went down like 2.5 pounds in 5 days. And I was like, okay, I got to eat a little more crap in here. So I guess if I were to cut, it would be pretty easy in the early stages, but I'm pretty sure there would be some muscle compromised as well. And it's definitely important
and
to keep performance. Yeah, exactly. So both aspects there.
Hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to kick this next question over to you. What is the most effective way to go from a deficit to maintenance calories?
So there's kind of two approaches, and the hardest way to answer this is because of the term effective, because there's really two sides of the coin. If you are someone who, let's say your diet was really easy for you, you don't have a high level of hunger or diet fatigue, you're just, hey, I'm done and I want to slowly start working things back up, taking the slow kind of reverse over a period of 4 to 8 weeks, slight caloric jumps. There's no and let me be clear, the benefit to this is mostly like psychological, in terms of, hey, my weight's not going to jump up like another 2 or 3 pounds overnight sort of thing. And the benefit that I will use it with mostly is it prevents to some degree caloric overages over what your new maintenance is. Because if we're only giving you like 200 calories at a time or whatever, instead of being like, hey, the diet's over at 1,800, tomorrow go to 3,000. That is where I think the best is just from like you still crossing your T's and dotting your I's more than you would if we were like, hey, open the floodgates again to what this estimated maintenance is. The downside there is if you have high diet fatigue and you're really ready for it to be over, it's essentially not over. You're at like the 95% mark. The second way is you just jump your calories back up to what estimated maintenance would be. Now, here's the hard thing. That estimation is an estimation. You may be a little bit high and within a few days start putting on, albeit very slight amounts of body fat. And then the other kind of detriment to that one is if digestive capacity isn't up to par. And if we're using that same example, we're at 1800, we go to 3000, you get super gassy, bloated, and all of these other things, which then will affect your appearance and then could start to mess with some of the psychological stuff. If I just dieted and now I'm all bloated and everything and wasted it, sort of thing. So two approaches. It's hard to answer which way is most effective until you weigh the pros and cons of each for yourself personally.
Yeah, I think you covered that really well. I will just provide my own personal preference, which is that the psychological side of trying to slowly reverse back up after being at the bottom of your diet, I find to be extremely difficult. Like, I basically extend myself psychologically to get to the end of the diet. And then the last thing I want to do is spend 4 to 8 weeks where I'm still basically having to be on and managing all of those little components. So for me, I prefer to just go back up to about maintenance or even a slight surplus, which I think there's some risks in doing that as far as accumulating body fat and stuff like that. But I guess it all ultimately, as we've discussed before, really comes down to how lean you got, because being stage lean has a completely different approach than being like the guy that got to 12% so he could do a photo shoot or something like that.
That's such a good additional point. If you're getting sub 10, sub 8, yeah, getting things up faster, your life will improve. If you're going from like a 24% body fat to 15%, you're not really, it's not in the same ballpark sort of thing.
Yep. All right, cool. Next question. I'll kick over to you for some thoughts initially. I naturally wake up after 6.5 hours of sleep well rested because it's high quality. Am I missing out on potential gains? If so, how can I make my body sleep more? Matt Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is causing anxiety and making it worse.
This one's hard. Personally, I am someone like, what I would say from my standpoint, and this is where I can feel most confident answering, mine is more relative to when I go to bed. If I go to bed at 9:30, I can sleep till about 6:30 sort of thing. If I go to bed at 12:45, I can sleep till about 6:30. So for me, that 6.5 hours is really relative of when I go to bed, because almost regardless, like my body's getting up at 6:30 sort of thing once the light starts coming out and noise starts being made outside. I would say are you missing out on potential gains? It's relative to other things like how hard your training is. Do you need that extra recovery capacity? If you're taking the like 80-20 training approach, probably not. It could also be dependent upon what periodization you're in. Are you, using our previous example, deep in a calorie deficit? The more, when you're dieting, the more you sleep, the lower your weigh-ins, the more fat loss you have. Like, it's very cut and dry there. So it really does depend. But I would say if you feel good, if your training is progressing and all of these things, and it's something that you're getting up at 6:30, and no matter what you do, you can't really push that back. As long as it's not impacting you and you have good objective metrics on this, I wouldn't say trying to needlessly chase optimality there.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point about waking up at 6:30 no matter what, because my body's kind of the same way. And so, yeah, if I go to sleep at midnight, I'll get 6.5 hours of sleep. And if I go to sleep at 10, I'll get 8.5 hours of sleep. So it's possible that maybe what you need to do is start trying to get yourself to go to bed slightly earlier. Because I wonder, if you go to bed at 9:30 or 10, are you really going to get up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning? Is that going to be what your body does just because you went to bed early? Or are you getting 6.5 hours of sleep because you're going to bed later and your body's naturally waking with the sun or with the light or whatever that is? So I'd try and maybe like gradually start going to bed earlier. But at the end of the day too, like, I struggle with this question because the guidelines state that people need between 7 and 8.5 or 9 hours. That is a general average. So there's going to be outliers on either side. There's going to be somebody that needs 9 or 9.5 hours, and there's going to be somebody that needs 6.5 hours. And so it's possible that you're an outlier. I never like to default to you're an outlier, because in the hypertrophy world, it's like, hey, most people respond to this many sets, but there's certainly people that respond to less or people that respond to more. And like to assume going in that you're an outlier, I just think the likelihood is pretty low. So yeah, I would try and go to bed a little bit earlier and just see what that does to your wake up time. All right.
Yeah, very well put.
Next question. How do you deal with injury and your mindset regarding rehab?
This one's kind of easy for me. I love training so much. It's literally my favorite thing to do. So the times that I've been put out of training with I've had tendon ruptures and things before, I will do anything. I'm like foaming at the mouth just to get back to doing what I want to do. So it was never like, I don't want to be here thing. This is the best I can do for now. So I need to do this so that I can return to training faster. And it's a necessary prerequisite to get back to what I enjoy doing. So I've always just viewed it as such.
Yeah, I agree completely. I feel like we either covered this in an episode, like a full deep dive, or it was like a deeper dive question that we covered amongst a few other questions. But I remember talking about this, and my main piece of advice is always do what you can do. Have a can do mindset instead of can't do mindset. And that's the way I approach it too. And I had PRP in my knee and I couldn't squat for X amount of time. So I did more hamstring work. As soon as I could train my leg again, I still couldn't squat, but I could do leg extensions. So I did leg extensions. In the time between when my knee was recovering and I still couldn't do leg extensions and I was doing more hamstring work, I was doing leg extensions and squats on my other leg. It's like you find the things that you can do that allow you to keep being in the gym and pursuing your goals, and you work around it, or you just basically don't work it, but you work the areas of the body that you can work. And in many ways, like you see these types of things occur and you actually see gains occur in the body areas that you're not training. The perfect example is powerlifting, where somebody might get injured and suddenly they can't deadlift or squat for a month. And so they just end up benching more. And suddenly their bench shoots up like 30 pounds and they get through a sticking point a plateau that they've been unable to get past for a long time because the deadlift and the squat are taking so much of their recovery capacity. And you see a lot of that same stuff with even smaller injuries or things that you're working around. It's like, hey, if I can't train my lower body as effectively as I want to, then my upper body grows more, or vice versa. Going into it with a positive can-do mindset and realizing that there are still gains to be had is important. And then remembering that whatever you lose along the way, like if you atrophy your leg because your knee has PRP in it, that shit will come back in a matter of a few weeks once you start training it again.
Yeah. The one last thing I'll add there that I forgot to is just being in that positive gym environment and moving your body in the capacities that you can, like that will be very beneficial for your overall outlook and mindset, especially when the alternative is just like sitting on your ass and waiting. I'm talking a stark contrast between the two of them. So like Bryan said, get in there, do what you can, especially if you have a really positive like gym environment. Like I remember when I ruptured my Achilles and had the cast on, I would still come to the CrossFit gym. I couldn't really do much, but just like being around that environment and seeing my friends and stuff was like very motivating. And I remember I did pull-ups and push-ups every single day.
And bench press, I think. Yeah, you bench too. Yeah.
Yeah. The bench I wasn't for a while because everyone had to help me load it. And I felt bad because I couldn't carry the weights around. That's why the handstand push-ups and pull-ups worked really well. But I got damn good at pull-ups after that. And so it was silly, but it was like enough to keep my mind from being in the gutter. And that was well worth it in and of itself.
Yeah. Find something that you can do that you can focus on progression, and it'll help you a lot in kind of the mental side of getting through that as well.
Yeah. Let's kick this one over to you. Is there a minimum threshold duration for zone 2 cardio?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think where that line is pretty ambiguous, but the lowest number that I've heard from anybody is about 30 minutes. And that's because the first 10 minutes are generally just getting your body warmed up and into the cycle of getting your heart to pump blood and your body to take in oxygen in a specific manner that becomes conducive to improvements in mitochondrial function and stuff like that. And so if the first 10 minutes are just your body figuring it out, then it seems like you need at least like 20 minutes of consistent in that zone time. So in that case, 30 minutes would be the minimum. I think that's the minimum practically for people. I think if you're really looking to optimize and get like the maximum benefit from it, I would definitely go more for 60 minutes or 45 at the very low end. I always say 45 to 60 minutes because from what I've read and heard, it seems that 45 minutes in zone 2 seems to be the point where a lot of magic happens. And oftentimes it takes an hour of you biking or running or rowing or whatever it is to accumulate 45 minutes of zone 2, because there's that beginning time where your body's getting into the zone and adapting. And then there's the period where maybe you're not in the zone the whole time. Like maybe you dip out into zone 1 for a minute, or you dip up into zone 3 for a few seconds here and there. And so what I usually do, just as a default to be safe, is I go until I have about 45 minutes of zone 2 time. And so that usually takes me somewhere between 50 and 60 minutes, depending on how accurate I am that day. And then I've heard people say that if you go out riding, like I ride in a manner that I'm on trails the whole time, so I don't have to stop and start or wait for cars or anything like that. But if I were out on the road and I was stopping at red lights and having to deal with that whole mess of stuff, I've heard that you need to do 90 minutes because it could literally take that long for your body to go out of the zone, stop, then get back in the zone, then stop. And so I've heard 90 minutes for people that are doing this outside and stuff. But I think if you just look at the time spent in zone 2, that at least gives you like a general idea. All right, let's try this one over to you, bud. Can a newbie start a surplus, or should they start at maintenance to minimize fat gain?
So I'll read here what I wrote down and then I'll extrapolate here. So the research that we have tends to suggest that newbies are best suited for a larger surplus. And then as your training age increases, the depth of the surplus generally gets smaller. So when you're a newbie, it's green fields ahead of you. You are going to make the best gains of your life in the first year of training. Don't limit that by being afraid of fat gain. Also, don't eat like you're a super heavyweight sort of thing and put down 8,000 calories a day, but you go start with a surplus, right? Make sure your training is decent. If you're super green and don't know what to do, follow one of Bryan's programs. They'll be fantastic, and put yourself in a surplus and really good things will happen.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, especially the following my program part. No, but I will also add that because you're new, there's some recomp that's going to occur. So you thinking that you're going to gain a bunch of fat because you're in a surplus is probably not entirely true, because you're also going to gain a ton of muscle. And Chris Barakat has been the forward thinker and studying this stuff. And he has had a number of case studies and maybe even RCTs. I'm not really sure. Definitely case studies where he's shown people go into a huge surplus and they essentially don't gain much fat at all and primarily gain muscle because of their newbie stage of training. So I think that especially if you're a newbie, don't be scared of going into a surplus. Okay. You got this one covered. It looks must have accessories for the gym, and they put i.e. wedges, Versa grips, etc.
These are the questions that light my soul on fire, because I just picture myself of all the times I've been in a gym and being like, this fucking place doesn't have this thing and all this stuff, and just talk super trash in my head. So the things that I have here is the 10 and the 15 degree wedge. What I would say is get a bigger wedge than you think, not necessarily a steeper angle like a 20. Let me back up. If you have absolute dog shit ankle dorsiflexion, get the 20. If you have decent to great, you'll need less. The prime wedges, I like the individual ones. They are beefy and wide, but I've purchased some that I'm like, oh yeah, these are wide enough. They're not too stable, and I have to use them very trepidatiously. So I would say get a little bit bigger than you think. Versa grips are fantastic. I do really like those. Small box or step. I don't really like the traditional aerobics class step because it's really bulky, but I know there's some that are stackable as well. And I have here maybe about 4 to 6 inches. And the utility is going to be this is for split squat variations, a front foot elevated reverse lunge, these sorts of things, or something to do calf raises off of. That's another one. When a gym doesn't have that, I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here? Why isn't this piece of equipment in here? Wrist cuffs. Another note I have here is small enough to use around your palm. So sometimes the leg cuffs might be really beefy and they're just a little bit too big to use around your hand or something. And then one of my favorites is the Prime medium bar. And that's just where you can have, there's like little slots for the carabiners so that you can, okay, I want to do like an upper back pull down D handles. You can go pretty wide. If you want to do a more like neutral grip row, you can go a little bit more narrow, and a really good, comfortable pair of D handle grips.
Yeah, that's a really great comprehensive list. So the Prime wedges only come in 10, 20, or 30. So if you're going with Prime, I don't believe there's 15, or at least there wasn't last year when I looked. There may be now.
Maybe I'm confusing the 20 and 30 then. That which could be.
Yeah, I use the 20s and I agree. Like I have pretty good ankle dorsiflexion, but the 20s are fine for me. 30s would obviously be way too much, and 10s I think would be fine, but I like the middle ground of the 20s. Versa grips for sure. If you're not going to do Versa grips, then straps or Cobra grips are like this other version of Versa grips that are a little bit cheaper, I believe. The small box step is a good idea. I think that, who makes those things? I'm blanking out on the name of the company that makes these things now that are stackable, but hopefully it'll come back to me.
Like the puzzle ones that go together? Yeah, I don't know the name of the company either.
It's like on the tip of my tongue. I'm thinking back to when I was in San Diego, and one of the things that was critical for me was the little yoga blocks to put on the hack squat. And that seems like such a small little nuanced thing that maybe isn't even required for you. But for me, on the specific hack squat machine that we had, I needed to be able to get more depth, and I couldn't adjust the foot plate enough. So I had to put the yoga blocks on the shoulder pads of the hack squat and then strap them in with some little bands. So that was critical for me to be able to get the most out of the hack squat there. You may or may not need that. The wrist cuffs, yeah, I believe that like they're even called ankle cuffs, like even though we're using them on our hands in our palm, like you're saying, to hold them. I believe if you're going to get these on Amazon or whatever, they're called ankle cuffs. But he's right that you really want the small ones that are like less than 1 inch in diameter, because if you get the really big ones that actually go around your ankle, they won't fit in your palm and then they're awkward. I very much like those small wrist cuffs. I think those are actually one of the most important things for me right now as far as doing like lateral raise movements and like tricep movements primarily.
Yep.
The Prime medium bar, also a great idea. I think if you wanted to get around that, you could just use like your standard lat pull down bar, and then you could slide some D handles onto the lat pull down bar. There is that little ambiguity of, hey, is it in the exact same place that it was the prior week or whatever? But I find once you get tension on there, they don't slide around and move, which I think is a worry that some people may have. D handles are 100%, without a doubt, you must have them. Most gyms do. So I don't think if you're training in a gym that you have to get them. If you're at home and you don't have them, please go out, spend $19 on Amazon and buy yourself some D handles. But yeah, I think for the most part, you covered all that pretty well.
There's one other one I just thought of. If you're using like a leg press or something like that and the angles just don't really work for you, or the depth, another one I like is like a thicker, it's not really a yoga pad, but it's like a thick foam like pad that's squishy, and you can smooth out the sit position of the bench. And it'll obviously, let's say you're running out of the final 2 inches of depth and you're bottoming out the leg press, like that will help you get a little bit more ROM in there without bottoming out. That's one that I'll use a lot with like the Cybex squat press.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff, like with the yoga blocks, it just depends on if the quality of the machines that you're using require you to have to modify the range of motion or not.
Yep, exactly.
All right.
Okay, this next one, let's kick over to you. Question is, I am a very new dad with an unpredictable ability to train. What are the biggest rocks?
Yeah.
This is a good question.
It's a good question. You put 2 notes down here that were some things I was going to say as well. So you wrote full body sessions due to unpredictability. I think that's a great idea. Lengthened movements only, question mark. Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea as well. I think back to the 2 periods of time where I was a new dad. And the first one, I basically did a 3 times a week full body program, all compound movements. It was like a squat, bench, dead style powerlifting program with some accessory work. But the squat, the bench, or the dead led each day. I think I squatted on Mondays and Fridays, deadlifted on Mondays after I squatted. did a little bit of Oli work or RDLs on Friday after I squatted. So Fridays and Mondays were primarily lower body based. One of the days was a lighter recovery based day, and one was like a heavier, really go take it to the house type squat day. And then the middle day on Wednesday was more of a bench overhead press focus day. There's many ways you can obviously arrange that. And honestly, to be completely frank, if I were to be in this position again right now, I would not be doing a powerlifting style squat bench dead program. But at the time, that worked really well for me based on the environment that I was in. I only needed to train 3 days a week. If I missed a session, it wasn't a big deal. I could push it to Saturday or Sunday and just keep the rotation going. All of those movements are lengthened too. So that fits into kind of your other point, being lengthened movements. And then I look back to my second child being born, and this was actually the very, very beginning of COVID. And so the situation was entirely different. Instead of 3 times a week where I was going to a gym for these more robust, longer sessions, I was at home with only dumbbells and a few other kind of small pieces of equipment. And so I was working out in 20 to 30 minute increments multiple times a day. Like, kid would go down for a nap, I'd hit split squats. Kid would go down for a nap, I'd do some weighted push-ups. And so there's like a bunch of different ways you can think about this. And to be honest, I actually think the second way was more conducive to being a new dad than the first way. But it very much depends on if you have a home gym or not. If you are at the peril of having to get in your car and go drive somewhere and go to a gym, then 2 to 3 times a week, full body, just fitting them in as you can is probably the best approach. But if you have a bunch of dumbbells or a home gym, I actually think training higher frequency with really small doses of training is probably better. And you can create between 6 and 12 little mini sessions if you want to be super organized about it. And every time that you have 20 or 30 minutes, just knock out one of those little mini sessions. Like today is split squats and push-ups. Tomorrow is dumbbell rows and RDLs or whatever it is, however you want to organize that. There's a bunch of different ways you can probably go around that. So I found myself with the second kid training twice a day, 5 days a week in most cases, because I was just hitting these like 20-minute chunk sessions. So I would try not to stress about it. And just, again, it's like that can-do mindset. What can I do and how can I structure things in a manner that gives me the highest likelihood of being able to fit these sessions in?
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything more to that because I don't have any experience with being a new dad.
Yeah. Okay, this is an interesting one. I think we'll probably both have some opinions on it, but do you think training sessions should be written differently for females? Would love if you would read Up to Speed by Christine Yu. You have a great way of summarizing, plus I listen and do whatever you say. Thank you. Please don't listen to whatever I say and do it. That's not the way to go. I did not read Up to Speed by Christine Yu, so I'm not up to speed on that. But my general view is that for the most part, the main training principles stay the same for females. As many of you guys know, I write programs for Paragon Training Methods, and we are 90% female at Paragon. And so one of the main things we do there, just based off popular demand, is that we do slightly less chest work and we do slightly more glute work. That is literally the only changes. Maybe if you were to get like really nuanced about it, you could say women handle a little bit more volume than men do. But when you actually like that seems to be a common sentiment. Oh, women are like damage protected and they can just do so much volume and recover from it. But when you look at the literature on this, it's literally like 10 to 20% more volume seems to be where women lie as a general average. And so if you're looking at somebody that's doing 10 sets a week per muscle group, now you're like, okay, I'm a woman, I can do way more volume. That's not, okay, you can do 20 sets per muscle group. That's, you can do 11 or 12 sets per muscle group. That's your 10 or 20% increase, right? So this idea that women can just handle loads of volume and recover fine, I think is a little bit misaligned. And I know there's this increasing popularity in the space of women syncing their training with their cycle. I honestly don't know much about this. I have my opinions. The people that I respect in the industry tend to basically say that this is a poor idea, and that you would be spending 1 to 2 weeks of every month, which is 13 to 26 weeks of every year, basically not training hard if you're trying to sync your training with your cycle. And so my general thought on that, at least for the little bit that I know about it, is to say that you shouldn't do that. But yeah, that's, I guess, my opinions on the matter as they stand right now.
Like what Bryan said, generally you're going to find a little bit less interest in chest, a little bit more interest in glutes versus quads, and then potentially maybe a little bit extra emphasis on the lateral delt sort of thing. But the latter, I would say, is much less than the first two things. And to piggyback on what Bryan said about the differences in the hormonal shifts and stuff like that with the monthly cycle, it's from I haven't seen anything definitive that would be worth the extra added planned variability into the training plan and stuff. If anything, I'd keep some notes in a logbook that's, hey, this is the week before my cycle or whatever it is. Like, I'm a little bit naturally stronger, so that when you come in the week after and maybe you got 13 reps the week before, you can only get 12, to not like have a meltdown about it, and just know that you might have a few days per month where your performance is a little bit better, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
But again, not worth trying to micromanage, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. This one, let's kick over to you first. So the question is, with Attia's emphasis on grip strength, have you reconsidered trade-offs with using grips on back/deadlift exercises? I'm still using them, especially on back, since I had a lot of room for development, but I am now wondering if it's worth it if grip strength seems to be so important for longevity and health span.
Yeah, the note you put under here is pretty much what I was going to say as well. You noted that it's probably that grip strength is being used as a proxy. And I think that's 100% right. Yeah, so they're not legitimately looking at weightlifters and being like, this weightlifter who already has better grip strength than the population is going to die earlier because his grip strength is not as good as this other weightlifter that has even better grip strength. So I think it's important to remember that just by being a weightlifter in general and having strong grip strength, you're already in the upper echelon. One of the things I've had to do when listening to Attia talk is remember that he's talking to a general population of people, many of which don't even exercise at all. And if they do exercise, they're probably more cardio fiends than they are resistance training focused. And so it would be like telling somebody who already has top 5% in the world VO2 max and being like, well, there's decreased mortality if you can get into the top 2.5% of VO2 max. And it's, yeah, that's what the numbers say, but there's so many other factors that go into this like milieu of things that increase longevity. And I really doubt that your grip strength going from really good to really good is going to have any significant impact on your longevity. And like Aaron said, I think it's being used as a proxy. As a general just assessment of grip strength, the way that Attia assesses whether you have sufficient grip strength to be in this camp of increased longevity is that you're supposed to be able to pick up half of your body weight in each hand. So that would be like a 95 or 100-pound dumbbell in each hand for me, and then walk with it for 1 minute. I could do that with no problem. I could do that with my eyes closed going up a hill. And
I don't know about me.
No. So that's
I'm not sure.
That's his test. And so I feel like as long as you can pick up half your body weight in each hand and walk for a minute, I would think that your grip strength is completely fine. And if you can't do that, then yeah, maybe that would be something to consider working on.
I feel like we should make a little bit of an Instagram challenge, right? Because I'm thinking, okay, I'm like 210 more or less. That's a 105-pound dumbbell in each hand. Walking for a minute? I don't think I can do it.
So do you remember back in the CrossFit days where we would do these 100-pound dumbbell farmer's walk challenges?
Yeah.
So we would do them in the alley outside the Cass Street gym, which was 100 meters down and 100 meters back, right? So 200 meters. I could make it all the way down with no issue. And I could even make it like halfway back up. And that would be like 2.5 to 3 minutes by the time I would set them down. Just thinking of that as context.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think, no chalk, anything, just like in the gym. I don't think I can do that. I'm going to try. I'll film it and see if I can do it, but I got to write it down so that I remember. But I think this would be a really fun thing for the listeners and stuff. But that's one of the things, like, not to get us too sidetracked, but I had to stop. Something that was cool when we were younger was like going rock climbing. I couldn't do it anymore because I couldn't support my body weight with my hands and fingers.
Yeah.
And I sucked at it.
You're too big.
So I think, because I'm one of those people, I don't have like my wrists and fingers, like my fingers are fucking skinny relative to the rest of my body. And I don't have like really big joints or anything like that. So I think I'm one of the people who's maybe like at a slight disadvantage, but I find it interesting, the vast difference in our confidence in that, in what you just said.
I think I may go out and film that today too. I think you've inspired me to make a post about this. I really didn't think you would have any doubts at all. So this is interesting to me.
Yeah, I could be wrong and impress myself, but I do not have much confidence in that.
Cool. Let's try it out and find out.
Yep. This next one I'll kick over to you as well. Do you ever purposefully use pre-fatigue methods in order to need less weight on a big lift later in the workout?
Yeah, so there's really two ways that you can think about this question. One would be pre-fatigue, as it would be like a pre-exhaust superset. And I don't do this super often, especially not with lower body. My favorite example of pre-exhaust superset would be going from a dumbbell lateral raise or cable lateral raise to some sort of overhead press type movement. And I do use that occasionally. I do the same for chest, where I'll sometimes go from like a dumbbell fly or a cable crossover type movement to a push-up. So I do use those occasionally, but I don't necessarily use them, as this person stated, to need less weight on the big lift. The way that I do use pre-fatigue so that I can use less weight on the big lift is not as a superset, but literally just as a exercise sequencing, like how I order the exercises in the workout. And I actually pretty much do this almost on everything. And it's a mere factor of going from short overload movements to lengthened overload movements. So I almost always prefer to do my leg curls before I do my RDLs. And I almost always will do leg extensions before I do my hack squat or my pendulum squat. And for those reasons, like you said, like I think it increases mind muscle connection with the area that you're training, but it also means that you can achieve the stimulus that you're looking for with less total load. And in my case, I find that means less compensation too. So especially when you're going to a movement like an RDL, where there is a lot of room for compensation, it just keeps me honest and allows me to focus more on the glutes and hamstrings in the movement and less on the ego fueling my load selection. I think for lower body movements, exercise ordering certainly has a place. I think it does for upper body movements too. On a smaller scale, you'll see me going from a cross body tricep push down, and then the next movement will be an overhead tricep extension. Same thing with biceps. I'll go from like a cable spider curl, which is short overloaded, and then the next movement will be a cable face away curl. And I'm not doing this to use less weight, like the question asks. It's more just about what I believe to be the optimal exercise sequencing for hypertrophy.
I don't think there's anything I could add on to the back of that. You covered that from every angle that I thought of.
Cool.
I guess this next one, let's kick to you as well. Can you include intensity techniques in sets made of only partial reps?
Yeah, there's no reason you can't, especially if you're using them the way that Milo Wolf does it, where you're establishing a predetermined stop point. So say you're doing 60% of range of motion, then you could just do a set to whatever RIR you want to do. You could take your 15-second rest. You could do rest pause sets, myo reps, whatever you want to call it. Same idea. You can also do partials after failure the way that I do them. So you could essentially go to failure, and then your intensity technique would be letting range of motion drop off and going into partial reps. The reverse drop set itself is an example of an intensity technique. So that would be you go close to failure on a row or something like that. And then without resting, you increase the weight 20% and you do a bunch of partial reps. There's definitely a number of different ways you can implement intensity techniques with partials. And I think there's probably utility in that in some cases as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you answered that one really well. There's nothing else I can add onto the back of that one.
Cool. 2 questions about heart rate zones that I guess I can tackle here real quick. Can I trust the heart rate zones on my Apple Watch? Maybe. This is not asking how accurate the Apple Watch is in detecting your heart rate or anything like that. This question is asking the predetermined zones in the Apple Watch. When I first got my Apple Watch and got into this cardio stuff, the zones were actually like perfectly set for what I needed at that time. It had my zone 2 as 126 to 138 beats a minute, which I think is pretty spot on for beginning. But over the course of the last 8-9 months of doing all this cardio, my ability to hold zone 2, my heart rate has gotten higher. So initially it was in the 65 to 70% of max heart rate range, which was directly in the middle of that heart rate zone on the Apple Watch. And then as I got fitter, I've just had to adjust the zones manually. And I didn't even adjust them that much. It was 126 to 138, and I adjusted it to 132 to 144. So I think I took it up 6 beats on either side. So you can definitely go in and you can manually adjust them if you find that they're not accurate. But at least from my experience, they seem to be pretty accurate from the get-go because they're basing it on your max heart rate that it's detected. So as long as your Apple Watch has detected your max heart rate somewhat accurately to what your max heart rate actually is, then I think you can trust the zones. If your max heart rate has been pinged at some errored number, whether it's too low or too high, then I think your zones will probably be off at that point. Anything to add?
Well said. No, I will just add that I thought I was smarter. I have a Garmin, but I thought I was smarter than the Garmin and put my own zones in there and then promptly fell apart this past week doing my cardio. And it said I was in the like zone 1 when I was in like the 6th interval on my bike sprints.
Yeah, you might need to adjust those again.
I immediately got home and just reset it back to what it was originally telling me they were.
Yeah. All right, next final question before we do the final. So second to final. I struggle to get into zone 2 on a bike. How do I get there without impacting my leg workouts? Yeah, so I would encourage you to go back and actually listen to the episode we did on zone 2 and zone 5 cardio. I want to say it was episode 103, 104, something like that. I could be wrong. But in that episode, I discussed a lot about how the bike was really a struggle for me to get into zone 2 when I first started. And it was simply because I couldn't clear the lactic acid fast enough out of my legs. And so my legs would begin burning well before my heart actually got to the zone that I wanted to be in. Since then, I've realized that I've gotten a lot better essentially at flushing the lactic acid. And I think that's just a factor of time and commitment to the endeavor. So now I can get into zone 2 fine on the Peloton without my legs feeling like they're going to die. However, in that meantime, because I do relate to this question and I had a lot of experience in a similar situation, I had to spend a decent amount of time alternating between standing and sitting. And I still do that, but just not to the same extent. So when I would sit, my legs would blow up in the quads because they're the primary mover. And then when I would stand, I would be able to push backwards more. And so I'd be able to put more of that into my glutes and hamstrings. And so until you get to the point where you can just sit and your legs can properly flush all that lactic acid out, I think that alternating between standing and sitting might be the key there so that not one area gets extremely fatigued over the other. But again, if you go back and listen to that episode that we did, I specifically stated that doing an exercise bike without arms that move, so not like an assault bike or a Rogue Echo bike, but say you're using like a Peloton or something like that, or a road bike, it's just difficult if you're not used to clearing lactic acid out of your legs like that, and it just takes time. The bikes with arms allow you to use your upper body equally, and so it takes a lot of that stress off your legs. Or if you feel your legs are starting to burn too much, you just switch to more upper body, and then you can switch back to more legs. So it gives you some more of that freedom that way. But yeah, I think ultimately what's happening is you just have poor ability to clear lactate from your legs, and that's part of being poor at cardio. And so improvements in cardiovascular performance include the ability to clear lactate better. And so that's not just the lactate that's going through your cardiovascular system that's making you breathe hard, but it's literally the lactate in the muscle as well. And so it's all interrelated.
I think what Bryan subtly jabbed you with you are not good at cardio, which is why you can't get there without your legs burning.
That's literally exactly. Thank you for the synopsis. Yes.
Which was also a subtle jab at me because I find myself in the same boat.
It was a subtle jab at myself until the last couple months. Final question here for Aaron. Actually, the person wrote for Aaron, so thank you for sending this to me for Aaron. Can you go through each of the coaches you've hired and share a few key takeaways of what you've learned from both a coaching and a business perspective?
This is such a good question. And I'm not going to lie, I sat here preparing for this episode and I probably spent like 20 minutes sitting here thinking about this question. Off the top, I've had 3 coaches primarily that I've worked with. The first being Jason Theobald, the second, Alex Bush, and the third and my current coach is Jackson Pios. And I guess I'll just start at the top. So to peel it back a little bit, I feel incredibly fortunate that Jason Theobald was the first person I reached out to. This is in very early 2018, right as I was getting like very serious about the space. And the reason I feel very fortunate there is when you're new in something, like kind of what Bryan and I briefly talked about on last week's episode, you're very impressionable. And I feel like Jason was wonderful for me to be impressed upon by. And the real reason is I learned from him to really place an emphasis on health. Fitness does not automatically equal health. And that's something that we find so much in this space, especially with like your younger coaches and stuff. Oh, I'm lifting, I'm training, that's healthy. They are correlative, but not necessarily, they're not like a mutually exclusive. I might have used that in the wrong context, but I hope you get what I'm saying. Just because you like lift weights and you're not overweight doesn't necessarily mean that like things are moving in a healthy manner. And he really sparked my desire to learn about the human body at a deeper level, like the endocrine system, understanding digestion at a much deeper level and those sorts of things. And I've said this before, but I feel like that in him specifically had really helped skyrocket the trajectory of my coaching career from the beginning. I would say from a business perspective, like I didn't learn like too much from Jason because it was very X's and O's of nutrition, but he's open. He talks about just like when you do a really good job, like results speak for themselves, right? When you take care of your clients, they refer you other clients, and that's a very sustainable way to build a business. So that's something that I've used as a cornerstone for myself there personally. Moving forward into Alex was a bit of a different approach as it was more very much like physique focused. And I think something that where maybe I'm not the best person for this question to ask is when I'm reaching out to a coach, there's already a minimum threshold of what they know or assume that I am coming in with, right? So Alex isn't going to be teaching me about this is how you count macros and these sorts of things. It was like we got to business and I said, hey, I want to learn more about the phasing of how he cycles the different stimuli of training. And that was the biggest thing that we really focused on. A lot of movement execution and pretty much just physique stuff. Like we very rarely talked about food there. And the one thing I will say that from Alex and how they structure their company is they run their business. And I'm obviously speaking from my outside perspective. It's much more akin to like how other industries work. So in the contract, when there's going to be, I think it was 2 weeks out of the year, but please forgive me if I'm botching this, but they're like, hey, there's going to be 2 weeks out of the year that we take a vacation and you're not going to have check-ins. And then one of those weeks came up during my time with him, and it was just like, okay, we're not doing check-ins this week. Alex is on vacation, like seeing family. And that one was a bit of an eye-opener because for me, that's like something in 5 years. I've only missed the majority of my check-ins 1 week over 5 years. So I've never taken that full time away. And even that week, I still did 6 or 7 for clients that still submitted them, even though I asked them not to, which that's on me sort of thing. So that was like some good stuff I took from them. And then moving into Jackson. So I will preface it's not a fair assessment comparatively because I've just simply spent a lot more time with Jackson than the other two. The other two were purely like, I've never even met Alex Bush, purely online. We correspond. Jason, I worked with for well over 2 years. I met him one time at a conference sort of thing, but Jackson and I have some like business together and those sorts of things. And we'll we have more of a relationship, I would say. So it's a little bit different. One of the biggest things I picked up from him is like being more confident in what I know to be true, regardless of possible research limitations on it. That was something that I used to really struggle with, being like, okay, I think I feel confident in this, but these people with PhDs who are smarter than me are saying X. So that makes me wrong. And he has taught me and shown me to trust your gut a little bit more in some of those things. And that's just been eye-opening for me. Challenge your clients, especially when they are shooting below the mark that they are capable of. Something that I think Jackson does really well is he's very much focused on the mission and saying, hey, you came to me with these goals that you said you want to hit. When you go have 12 beers over the weekend, like how is that representative of these sorts of things? So being a little bit more firm there in the proper contexts, that sort of thing. Those are both coaching related. And then lastly, to wrap up, business, I think at some point we should try to get Jackson on. He'll be a wonderful conversation, but
yep,
a lot. Let's just put it that way. Jackson is a machine, like a literal machine. He has a very interesting outlook on things, and I don't want to try and speak for him with some of the business that we have together. It's been a very informative process for myself, but also just in, again, being confident in when you do good work, people will flock to it thing. And I'm sure more will come out over the coming months on that. But it has been very beneficial for me from a professional standpoint. And I'm grateful for the relationship that we've built together and for everyone that I've had the opportunity to learn from in my coaching career thus far. So a really cool introspective question and hopefully a decent answer from myself.
Yeah, that was really a really tight synopsis there, trying to put 4 years of coaching into a 6-minute segment. Really good work there. And definitely feel like we should get Jackson on as well, especially with all the work that you guys are doing together right now.
Yeah, we'll see if we can get on his calendar sort of thing.
Sweet. Well, I need to go get kids to school and stuff. Thanks for hanging out, guys.
Thank you guys for listening. As always, Bryan and I will talk to you next week.
Bye.